Hi, I'm Gary White for Channel 6 Central Kentucky Television. I'm here with State Senator Jimmy Higdon, who is representative for the 14th District. That includes Marion County as well as Nelson County and several other areas, but in our viewing area. And we're here for a legislative update as we're recording this. It's the beginning of July, which a lot of new bills, new taxes, new things are going into effect as of July 1st. We're going to talk some about that. But first we're going to talk about the pension reform. And I think the last time we were together, we were talking about a bill that had passed through both houses, but it was kind of a unique way in which it passed. And there's some issues that have arisen with that. So can you tell us where that bill stands currently and what's kind of going on with it?
Yeah, of course, you know that Judge Shepard struck it down last week and called it that it was unconstitutional. Primarily, the Constitution says that a bill has to be read publicly 3 days in a row before it can pass. So a bill can pass the General Assembly in 5 days. It takes that to do it constitutionally. It takes 5 days. It has to have 3 readings in the if it originates in the House, it be read 3 days. So you can start a bill on Monday and it gets a reading on Monday and on Tuesday, and they could read it again on Wednesday and pass it on Wednesday, and it would come to the Senate and it could actually get a reading on Wednesday in the Senate. So that'd be the first reading, second reading on Thursday and pass on Friday. That's the rule on a bill. Now, what happened on Senate Bill 151? It was Senate Bill 151 had its 3 readings, but what happened? The bill was substituted with another bill, and that's a part of parliamentary procedure. It's in Mason's manual, which we use as our guide for passing legislation. Section 722 talks about in Mason's manual that a substitute can be put into the bill, and it doesn't have to be read 3 times. The bill itself is what has to be read 3 times, and what we did, the Senate Bill 151 was a wastewater treatment bill. And it had its readings. It was substituted for the pension bill. And so therein lies the problem. Now, we've used that process for years. That doesn't make it right. It's never been challenged before. So we'll see how the court decision, like I said, Judge Shepard has struck it down as unconstitutional. Typically, it would go to the appeals court, then to the Kentucky Supreme Court. But a issue of this importance can typically skip the appeals process and go straight to the Kentucky Supreme Court. So I think it will be heard fairly quickly. We'll hear about that in August. Probably the Kentucky Supreme Court will hear that and decide if that's constitutional or unconstitutional. Now, if he rules it unconstitutional, it's back to the drawing board, and next session we will have debates and another pension bill, because we do have to have pension reform, and Senate Bill 151 does a lot of things, and some of the things it sets forth is a funding mechanism it puts into place. It requires future General Assemblies to do certain things. And I think that was one of the real important things in Senate Bill 151. Right now, under Kentucky law, there's nothing in statute that says that the General Assembly is required to make an ARC payment to teachers' retirement. So that was very important that was put in there. It now requires the General Assembly to every year make that ARC payment. That was not there, and consequently it hasn't been done. The other thing it does, it takes the teacher's retirement, it moves it from a percentage of payroll to level dollar funding, and that's an additional $400 million a year that the General Assembly or the taxpayers will have to contribute to teachers' retirement, and that doesn't start until the next budget cycle. But so those things are very important, Gary, and we'll go back and let me talk a little bit about the contributions that we're making to the pension systems now. The reason we're in this mess, we can go all the way back to 2002, and we can talk about, at that time, 2002, we had the stock markets had taken a hit, and money was tight in the 2002 budget, and the governor then was trying to, figure out, how do we make ends meet. So his budget director at the time, a gentleman by the name of Jim Ramsey, figured out and told the governor, said, look, Governor, the state is not statutorily required to make the ARC payment to the retirement system. So at that kind of started a trend where the governor's and the governor's budget, they did not recommend the full ARC payment for the KERS. Now CERS, the County Employee Retirement System, is required by law to make the actuarially required contribution. So, and in teachers' retirement, we were required by law to make a percentage of payroll payment to them. That was agreement when they set teachers' retirement up. So you have all three systems, and none of them are really making the full amount of what they actually need to pay, even though the law required CERS to pay the full actuarially required contribution. The amount they were paying the full what the actuaries told them to pay. But through I won't call it a scheme, but in an accounting principle that was used by actuaries all across the country, and every pension system in the country uses this actuarial assumption to figure payroll liabilities. And because we're using this, it's called a percentage of payroll. And what that does, it really artificially reduces the amount of money that the states put into their pension systems. Had we been using level dollar, and I'll explain that too, but had we not been using percentage of payroll, we would have been required to put a lot more money into our pension systems years ago, and we would probably been having this debate sooner had we been required to put in the full amount that was needed. So what's happened over the years, not only were we not putting in the full amount, we weren't even paying the interest. And so that unfunded liability continued to accumulate. And if you look back and look at the reasons why Kentucky's pension plans are underfunded, and we've talked about these many times, but only about 20% of it is contributed, 20% of the liability is contributed to legislative underfunding. And a big percentage of the underfunding is contributed to this percentage of payroll. And what that is, they anticipate a payroll growth, and teachers' retirement right now is at 4.5% percentage of payroll. And what that says that their payroll will grow 4.5% a year. Well, it's growing at about 1% a year. So that particular assumption has been allowing a lower payments and actually an underfunding of the system, and it's contributed for about 50% of the underfunding is that percentage of payroll. And like I said, it's used all across the country. It's not just Kentucky. Retirement systems all across the nation, all 50 states. We have an unfunded liability in the pension systems of about $6 trillion. Not billion, trillion. So Kentucky's not the only one with the problem. We probably have the KERS, Kentucky Employee Retirement System, is the worst funded system in the country. And it only has about 13% of the assets that it needs to pay what's been promised to employees. So we have our work cut out for us on that one. That particular system was, we did a reform on that in 2013, and anybody that was hired after January the 1st, 2014 has gone into what we call a hybrid cash balance plan. And so that was, so at that, and also in Senate Bill, that was Senate Bill 2 in 2013. It required the state to every year pay the ARC payment, the actuarially required contribution. We require future legislatures to do that, so we've made that payment every year now that we're required to do it, and so the underfunding in KERS has stopped, but you know it should have stopped a long time ago. But again, that was in 2014. So in 2014, we put in an additional $1 billion into the budget to cover that ARC payment for KERS. That's about 5% of the budget. And this past year, KERS went from a percentage of payroll. They were saying payroll was growing. They had a 5% payroll growth calculated into their ARC payment. And Kentucky's payrolls have actually been decreasing. You know, we don't have near as many people working for state government as we did 10 years ago. So we had, actually that number was probably a negative number. So this past year we went to level dollar, away from the percentage of payroll to level dollar. And that was an additional $700 million that we put into pensions this year. And so I can go back and give you, and it will kind of lead into the reason for tax reform. But in 2014, we put in an additional $1 billion. That's 5% of payroll. 2016, first time since 2008, we made an ARC payment to teachers' retirement. Was additional $500 million in each year in 2016. So in 2016, we put an additional $2.3 billion into pensions. This is above and beyond what the normal cost is for pensions, the contribution we make. So $2.3 billion into pensions in the 2016 budget, which was 10% of our budget, Gary. This year, with the passage of Senate Bill 1 that required us to make the ARC to teachers' retirement, and the going to level dollar with KERS, we put in this budget an additional $3.3 billion, $3.3 billion additional dollars into the budget this year for pensions. That's 15% of our budget. Now we're going to level dollar on teachers' retirement, and that was in Senate Bill 151 that required us to go to level dollar for teachers' retirement. That's additional $400 million a year. Next, in the next budget, 2020 budget, we'll be putting in $4.2 billion additional money, $4.2 billion into retirement, all the retirement systems combined. $4.2 billion, which is 20% of our budget. That is a lot of money. That is a huge commitment. And the only way that we get out of this mess that we find ourselves in depends on whose figures you look at. We're 35 billion or 45 billion unfunded liability. It's a huge liability, and we have to attack it. So what we've done, we've financed it over 30 years, and we're making a payment on it. We're reducing the debt. What we've done for the last, I guess, since 2002, we haven't even been paying the interest, so that that unfunded liability has increased. So we have to do this, Gary. It has to be done, and the only way to solve it is a lot of additional money. Now we have made, Senate Bill 1. Well, we start out. Let's start out and talk about the governor's plan that he introduced. It probably came out. I can remember the August 31st last year was a very interesting day. That's when the PFM report was released to everyone. And I had not seen an advance copy of it, so I heard it for the first time in the PPOB meeting, Public Pension Oversight Board, which I'm a member of, and we heard it for the first time on August 31st, and you know, it was really a scary report, and the only thing that I heard out of their recommendations, they recommended that we put money aside in Kentucky retirement system. We have a lot of people that worked 5, 10, 15 years and then went on to work somewhere else, so that their money is still in the retirement system. And what the PFM recommended that we do is to buy those accounts out, to you know, buy them, and we would have to bond money to do that most likely, but it would reduce our unfunded liability to buy those out at present dollar value versus waiting 20 years from now to pay it out. Mm-hmm. So that was the only thing I heard that day that I could say that I was pleased to hear. It was a very sobering conversation that day.
So when you're talking about the funding and paying it off over 30 years, is that what's outlined in the bill that has now been ruled unconstitutional?
That's correct.
So right now, because that bill has been ruled unconstitutional, there's nothing being done at present, correct?
Well, let's back up.
With the taxes.
Let's back up. You know, in Senate Bill 1 in 2013, we required that the state make the ARC payment. So KERS and also KERS, we moved to the KERS board moved to level dollar. So KERS, no matter what happens to Senate Bill 151, not a lot changes with KERS. There is some things though that deal with we had a pension reform in 2008, and what they did in 2008, they changed the health care for employees hired after 2008 do not have the same health care retirement benefit as those that were hired before 2008. Any employee after 2008 is required to make a 1% contribution for their health care. Mm-hmm. So in Senate Bill 151, we require, there was also a change in 2003 made some changes to health care, and I think that's actually when we started charging the 1%. Was in 2003, but there was a group of employees between 2003 and 2008 that weren't paying that. So Senate Bill 151 requires that small group to contribute 1% of payroll to retirement. Senate Bill 151 also it sets forth the retirement of the unfunded liability for teachers' retirement, and that's probably the one that's most affected by Senate Bill 151. And in fact, most of the reforms to the pension system for the other plans had already been done. Mm-hmm. Senate Bill 151 primarily dealt with teachers' retirement, although there were some other things in it. But like I said, the primary thing for Senate Bill 151 is that taking teachers' retirement from percentage of payroll to level dollar and obligating the General Assembly to an ARC payment. Those are the two big things that are in Senate Bill 151 that I think are very important. Now, Senate Bill 151.
And that's one that we're waiting to see.
Mm-hmm. Senate Bill 151 also changes. There was a lot of the governor's plan, and had a lot of recommendations, and we worked and changed a lot of those and came up with Senate Bill 1. And Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 151 are pretty much identical, but except for about four things. Senate Bill 1 recommended a reduction in COLA, cost of living allowances for retired teachers. Now, retired teachers retirement, they don't receive Social Security, so the only cost of living allowance they get is in their retirement, because that's the only retirement check they get. So there is a COLA paid, an increase in the amount that they draw that's paid every year. So that's cost of living allowance. Senate Bill 1 recommended reducing that for a period of 10 years. Senate Bill 151 took that out.
Right.
Senate Bill 1 also for current teachers, it recommended, or it legislated that their sick days, they could use their sick days toward retirement, any sick days accumulated by January the 1st of 2019. And Senate Bill 1, left that. Senate Bill 151 left that alone. That stayed in there. But there's also a 20-year delineation that in the bill that said that in Senate Bill 1, anybody that'd been there less than 20 years would have some differences. That they wouldn't be able to use a high 3 to retire. High 3 years, they'd have to use a high 5 years. So Senate Bill 151 took that out of Senate Bill 1. So that was a change in it. And the other thing is, of course, Senate Bill 1 had a hybrid cash balance plan, and Senate Bill 151 also went to a hybrid cash balance plan. So those were the basic parts of the differences in Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 151. So what was struck down, of course, like I said, there was no change to COLA. Then teachers with Senate Bill 151, if it's ruled unconstitutional, then they can still accumulate their sick days and use them toward retirement. Mm-hmm. And the hybrid cash balance plan would be out, and we would just have the regular teachers retirement plan. But again, the big part of it, and the important part, in my opinion, was those guaranteed payments that we were going to make to teachers' retirement. We were obligating future General Assemblies to pay those.
Right. So going back to the beginning too, when you're talking about the issue is kind of like with the substitution bill, because like 151 when it initiated was a water treatment bill.
That's correct. Right?
And then it was voted on 3 times as a water treatment bill?
It was read 3 times as a water treatment bill.
But then when it was voted upon, it had changed.
In the committee process, there was a committee substitute. It was amended to the pension plan, and so that was kind of the I guess the primary part of the lawsuit is that it was changed in the committee process.
So the text that was voted upon was never actually read 3
That's
times.
correct.
Correct.
The bill itself, Senate Bill 151, did have its readings, but the content did not. But and that's what the suit is about. Now, some states have a original purpose rule in their constitution that says that any amendment to a bill, it has to be germane. It has to be of the same subject as the bill itself, and that's something we might want to look at in Kentucky. If the court rules this unconstitutional, then I can see us doing a constitutional amendment that says that any bill has to have the original purpose. It could still be changed, but it couldn't be completely changed to another subject. And so that's and we should even if the court rules that what we did was constitutional, what the General Assembly did, we probably should look at the original purpose rule. I think that's a good rule to have. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussions about that next session. So
I know technically it was done legally, but doesn't it kind of seem shady that you read the bill 3 times and then the bill that you vote upon isn't at all the bill that's been read 3 times?
Well, I'm not.
I know that's technically legal,
right? I'm not. extremely proud of the process. You know, I understand people's concerns. You know, this bill, Senate Bill 151, was probably the most observed and watched bill ever, and all across the country with social media and all the emphasis on Senate Bill 151. I think more people saw that process than any other process. And there was the committee process in the House was, you know, the parliamentary procedure. I think they got to the same place they were going to get, but I think they probably skipped a few steps of parliamentary procedure to get there. And I think that brought a lot of focus on Senate Bill 151 also. You know, I tell people all the time, and I was told when I went to the General Assembly, that passing legislation is a lot like making sausage. It's not a real pretty process, but the end result is pretty good. And so that's been what we've always done. That doesn't make it right. And, you know, there's a very good chance that process will be changed. You know, I'd certainly would support change in that process. Transparency is good, but if you look back, if you go back and if you want to be real technical, in the Constitution, it says a bill has to be read publicly in its entirety 3 times in each chamber prior to passing. So that means that the bill, somebody would have to stand up in front of the room and read that entire bill, word for word, publicly, 3 times. That was the present day Kentucky Constitution said that. And I think that was written in 1792. But we haven't, my understanding, we haven't, there was another Constitution written after that. But my understanding is we haven't read a bill publicly 3 times since 1893. The General Assembly then went to a process called reading it by title only. If you listen to a piece of legislation when it's introduced into the Senate or the House, you know, the clerk will say it's read publicly, Senate Bill 151 read publicly for the 3rd time by title only. And that has always conformed with the law. And again, you know, Mason's manual, you know, that's kind of the Bible of parliamentary procedure. And probably, you know, one of the things I tell people all the time, I wish that I'd be absolutely dangerous if I'd have been in FFA or I guess there's a YMCA program that goes to Frankfurt every year and does parliamentary procedure. They actually mimic state government. They have these young people elect a governor and Speaker of the House and President of the Senate, and they have legislators and they have lobbyists and they have constituents. You know, it's the whole process. And you know, parliamentary procedure is a, you know, it's been around for a long time, and like I said, that's kind of the Bible that we use. Doesn't make it right, doesn't mean it can't be changed. And I'm all about transparency, so if we can do something that makes our process more transparent, then I'm very supportive. Like I said, social media has changed the game, and it's changed a lot over the years. There used to be a lot of things that were snuck into bills intentionally, you know, in the without people, you know, seeing it. Senate Bill 151, I don't think there was an attempt to sneak anything in there. It was just we were out of time, and we didn't come up with an agreement, a compromise agreement on Senate Bill 151 until late Wednesday night when we finally agreed on what would be to take some of those things out. So we had a limited amount of time. We only had 2 legislative days left, so to override a governor's veto, and so.
So we're going to wait and see on the legislative or the judicial process now. It's in kind of the hands for that bill, and see where that kind of leads. But we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some more stuff that's going on with the legislature.
I do want to talk a little bit about the session, about we had a lot of people that participated in the process. I got a lot of emails. I think all the constituents I talked to, they were very passionate about the subject, but they were very respectful, and I appreciate that. And I encourage constituents to participate in the process, and that's what we had in Frankfort in this pension bill, and I can see, I think a lot of people would see why this issue has continuously been put off, because it is a tough process. Hard decisions had to be made, and I feel that's why my constituents elected me and sent me to Frankfort, is to make those tough decisions, and that was a very tough decision, but it had to be done, and so that's where we find ourselves, and we'll see what the courts decide. If they rule it unconstitutional, then we'll be back in next session and we'll work on it, and we'll come up with a solution. They always say in the rule and compromise, when you finish a bill and nobody's really happy with it, then you probably might have done a good job. And Senate Bill 151, there's a lot of people that were unhappy. A lot of people were unhappy with the governor's comments, and a lot of people were unhappy with the process. And so we'll see where the Kentucky Supreme Court, where they end up on the issue. And again, if it's struck down if the Kentucky Supreme Court declares it to be unconstitutional, then next session we'll take that up. You could also see constitutional amendments to deal with the way we do legislation. I do not see this case being appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't see that's the next step in the appeals process. I don't see that happening. It takes years for a case to get through the U.S. Supreme Court. So again, I don't see that happening. If the Kentucky Supreme Court does uphold that the legislative process was flawed and it's unconstitutional in our interpretation of the law, a lot of other bills will be at risk of interest groups going to Frankfort and filing suit to have bills that were passed in a similar fashion declared unconstitutional. So a lot riding on this ruling by the Kentucky Supreme Court. So I trust the that process, and I have a great deal of trust in the Kentucky Supreme Court that they will look at it and make the right decision. And us in the General Assembly, and I'm sure the citizens of Kentucky will, whatever they decide, that we'll all live with it and move on. All we can do right now is wait and see. But I do believe that we'll know something sometime in August.
So we'll keep you updated on that. Stay with us. We'll be back with more with State Senator Jimmy Higdon here on Channel 6 on Kentucky Television.